Before we attested the moment aback Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez angry, what seemed like assertive defeat, into one of the best adept political comebacks in aldermanic history, accomplish abiding you hit that subscribe button and arena the notification bell, because what you're about to attestant demonstrates how preparation, timing, and hidden affirmation can transform an incredible accident into absolute victory. The autonomous accelerating conclave emergency affair had been alleged on a Thursday Black in the Rayburn House appointment architecture, with over 60 accelerating House associates acquisition in the bigger appointment allowance. The astriction in the air was credible from the moment associates began arriving. Word had already advanced through actionable channels that this wouldn't be an archetypal activity session. Jasmine Crockett had been architecturing a case about accumulated admission oral, the accelerating movement for months, and anybody knew that tonight article cogent was activity to be revealed. The allowance bashed with afraid activity as associates took their seats, abounding whispering to anniversaries added about what they'd heard through the aldermanic grapevine. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez accustomed 15 account for the meeting's official alpha time, which was abnormal for her. She about fabricated entrances at the aftermost moment, maximizing impact. But tonight she came early, demographing a bench at the advance of the room, her book and folders abiding anxiously in advance of her. She greeted added associates warmly, her acclaimed allure on abounding display, but those who knew her able-bodied could ascertain article altered in her demeanor. There was a quickness to her movements, afflicted attention to her interactions, that appropriate she knew absolutely what was advancing and had abled accordingly. Jasmine Crockett entered the allowance absolutely at 7, accompanied by 2 aides accustomed boxes of documents. The after-image of those boxes acquired several associates to barter afraid glances. A back Crockett-produced documentation, it usually meant someone's career was about to end. She set up her presentation abstracts methodically, abutting her laptop to the room's bump system, testing the audio alert to ensure aggregate would assignment perfectly. The adverse amid the 2 assemblywomen was striking. AOC sat relaxed, about casual, occasionally blocking her buzz and chatting with adjacent colleagues. Crockett stood rigid, focused, aligning her abstracts with the attention of a prosecutor about to present a case. The affair began with accepted business, but anybody knew that was aloof preamble. 20 minutes in, the chat anchored to accumulated admission on accelerating legislation, and that's aback Crockett stood to accomplish her presentation. She began absolutely laying out affirmation of how assorted accelerating organizations had been compromised by accumulated money, abounding through agent groups. The presentation was adverse in its thoroughness, assuming flowcharts of money effective from deposit ammunition companies through ecology nonprofits to accelerating political activity committees. For 30 minutes, Crockett presented her case, afterwards addressing AOC directly, but anybody could see where this was heading. The affirmation showed that several high-profile accelerating politicians had been demographing accumulated money while about opposing those aforementioned corporations. The allowance grew added afflictive as associates comprehend they were witnessing article unprecedented, a accelerating baton advancing to betrayal addition accelerating baton in advance of their absolute caucus. Finally, Crockett anchored to AOC directly. Representative Ocasio-Cortez, she said, her articulation abiding and prosecutorial. The affirmation shows that your political organizations have accustomed over 43 actor from deposit ammunition companies through these agent organizations. You've been taking money from the absolute corporations you affirmation to oppose, and in exchange, you've been abrading altitude legislation to accommodate loopholes that account them. How do you acknowledge to this evidence? The allowance fell absolutely silent, all eyes angered to AOC, cat and mouse to see how she would acknowledge to such adverse accusations. Abounding expected denial, anger, or the affection of anger that politicians often act when cornered, but AOC did article no one expected. She smiled, a one true Carget smile that seemed absolutely out of place accustomed to the circumstances, and boring stood up from her seat. Representative Crockett, AOC began, her articulation calm and controlled, showing none of the agitation that anybody expected. I want to thank you for this presentation. It's thorough, well-researched, and absolutely what I hoped you would do back I started abrading that aisle of affirmation 6 months ago. She paused, allowing that account bore in as a bashing bouncing through the room. You see, I've accepted about every dollar, every transaction, every affiliation you've presented tonight. I perceive about it because I've been documenting it myself, allying with federal board to betrayal the bigger accumulated aggression of accelerating backroom in American history. And you, Representative Crockett, have aloof helped me complete that investigation. The allowance erupted in abashed murmurs. Crockett looked absolutely annoyed for the original time anyone could remember. AOC absolutes to the front of the room, pulling out her own laptop and adjusting a 2-second awning that had been installed earlier that day after anyone acquainted its significance. What you don't know, Representative Crockett, is that I've been acting a bite operation for the past 18 months, accustomed at the highest levels of federal law enforcement. Every dollar I took from those deposit ammunition companies was marked, traced, and documented. Every affair with their lobbyists was recorded. Every aldermanic accommodation was choreographed to betrayal their absolute network. She began her own presentation, and it was abundantly bright that this went far added than anything Crockett had uncovered. AOC showed classified documents, partially redacted but clearly authentic, showing her cooperation with the FBI, the Department of Justice, and even international law enforcement agencies. The operation was called Project Green Shield, and it had been designed to betrayal how deposit ammunition companies were systematically entering accelerating movements worldwide to control and abrade them from within. The money you tracked to me, AOC continued, announcing bank records with federal tracking markers. Every penny was monitored by Treasury agents. The affairs with lobbyists you discovered, all recorded by the FBI with my cooperation and compromise, the aldermanic compromises that seemed to account corporations. Anniversary 1 was designed to make them think they had succeeded, while actually acquiring evidence of their bent conspiracy. We needed them to think they had bought me absolutely, so they would reveal their absolute network. Every politician they'd compromised, every alignment they'd infiltrated, every activity they employed. She pulled up a document that made several associates gasp. This is a closed indictment that will be credible tomorrow morning. 137 individuals will be arrested, including 23 accepted members of Congress, 47 lobbyists, and 67 corporate executives. The charges include bribery, racketeering, conspiracy, money laundering, and in some cases, crime for colluding with foreign oil companies to undermine American altitude policy. The accelerating movement hasn't been corrupted, Representative Crockett. It's been acted as bait to betrayal the corruption, and you, Representative Crockett, have aloof helped us bolt the lull. Crockett stood frozen, her acclaimed accusations abundantly absurd in the face of this revelation. AOC continued, her articulation accepting backbone and affection as she arise the abounding ambit of the operation. I apperceive this looks like betrayal. I apperceive that demography, that money, alike as allotment of a bite operation, seems like an abuse of aggregate we angle for. But we had to accomplish them except they had won. We had to let them anticipate they had aborted the accelerating threat. It was the only way to betray their absolute arrangement afore they could acclimate and adumbrate their operations better. She displayed communications amid deposit ammunition admirals discussing their aggression strategy. These admiral believed they had bought the absolute accelerating movement. They were so assured that they became sloppy, documenting everything, adulatory their achievement in writing. They created abundant affairs for how they would use their afflicted politicians to ensure no absolute altitude activity would ever arise while advancing the apparition of progress. They absolutely had spreadsheets artful how many degrees of abating they could get away with while be keeping profits maximized. The allowance was in complete anarchy now, but AOC aloft her duke for blackout and connected with alike adder adverse revelations. Representative Crockett, your analysis was absolutely allotment of our operation. We knew that if accumulated interests believed they had compromised me, other 18-carat progressives would eventually investigate. We counted on it. Your analysis provided the absolute awning for the final appearance of our operation. Aback you started digging, they afraid and fabricated mistakes. They approved to owning their advance, and in accomplishing so, Arai's admission we hadn't alike credible yet. She pulled up intercepted communications from aloof caniculae before. Actuality are letters amid deposit ammunition admirals discussing your investigation. They're debating whether to ambig themselves from me or bifold bottom on their investment. They chose to bifold down, appointing edition 15 actor after last anniversary to try to ensure my protection. That money alteration gave us the final affirmation we bear to affix them to adopted governments who were allotment altitude abnegation through American corporations. AOC afresh Arai's article that adapted the absolute narrative. The attenuated altitude accoutrement you activate in my legislation, they all coexist hidden accoutrement that absolutely accomplish them stronger than the original versions. Every artifact includes accent that seems favorable to corporations, but absolutely creates legal accessories that will activate massive penalties already enforced. The carbon account accoutrement that assume weak, they absolutely crave analysis standards that no deposit ammunition aggregation can meet. The connected timeline for implementation, it includes automated triggers that advance the timeline based on temperature increases, which are already activity met. She displayed the absolute aldermantug argument with a bill analysis. We formed with the best ecology attorneys in the country to a depthness accent that would fool accumulated attorneys into thinking they had won, while absolutely creating the arch altitude regulations ever accounted into American law. Aback these accoutrement are activated a but month, every deposit ammunition company that anticipated they had bought their way out of accountability will aquify themselves adverse blackout orders if they can't accomplish standards we apperceive they can't meet. The Adambra continued as AOC showed affirmation of all-embracing coordination. This wasn't just an American operation. We've been alive with accelerating movements in 12 countries, all acting analike bite operations. Tomorrow, aback the arrests activate here, analogous arrests will arise in the UK, Germany, France, Canada, Australia, and other nations. We're talking about the bigger coordinated appraisal of corrupted bribery in history, over 1,000 arrests worldwide, the admission of hundreds of billions in illegally acquired assets, and the complete restructuring of how corporations can admit autonomous governments. Crockett finally aquified her voice, admitting it came out all quiver and uncertain. How do we apperceive this isn't another band of deception? How can we assure that you're not actually corrupted for absolutely being corrupted? AOC's acknowledgement was to pull out a device that anybody accustomed as a sanctioned government information system. She placed a call, and within seconds, the awning showed the face of the Deputy Agdi General of the United States. The official accepted everything AOC had said, adding that Representative Ocasio-Cortez had been operating under federal authority and amnesty for any actions taken as part of the operation. The Deputy AG also acknowledged that Representative Crockett's analysis, while not clearly a part of the operation, had provided valuable assistance, and that no charges would be filed regarding her irregular admission to Certina documents. The allowance sat in a bashed blackout as the implications sank in. AOC had not only avoided being credible as corrupt, but had arisen herself as the artist of the bigger anti-corruption operation in history. She had played a role so good that a like-committed board like Crockett had been fooled. But more importantly, she had credibled the anti-corporations attack to override accelerating politics, not through opposition, but through aggression and control. AOC continued her presentation, now showing the actual outcomes of the operation. Because of this investigation, we've identified every above corporate attack to access altitude legislation for the past decade. We have affirmation of bent cabal that will result in convictions, not just fines. We have international cooperation that will anticipate corporations from simply moving their operations to friendlier countries. And most importantly, we have absolute affirmation that will make it politically absurd for any politician to take corporate money without facing select scrutiny. She afresh addressed the elephant in the room. I know that many of you feel deceived. You saw me taking what looked like corporate money and making what seemed like compromises. Some of you defended me and others criticized me, and both reactions were absolutely understandable. But I charge you to understand that this bamboozlement was necessary. If you had known, if there had been any indolence that this was an operation, it would have failed. The corporations had to accept they had won. They had to become overconfident, and they did. The affirmation AOC presented over the next hour was overwhelming. She showed how deposit ammunition companies had created a system of 500 afflicted environmental organizations designed to carry money to politicians. She arised that they had been planning to use their afflicted politicians to pan legislation that would have locked in deposit ammunition use for 50 other years while appearing to address altitude change. She credibled their alliance with foreign governments, particularly oil-bearing nations, to undermine international altitude agreements. But the best moment came when AOC displayed a video compilation of corporate admirals celebrating their declared victory. In these recordings, made at what they thought were private gatherings, they mocked ecology activists, laughed about bluffing the public, and absolutely discussed how they would use their political access to ensure no absolute altitude activity would ever be taken. One executive was recorded saying, "We own the progressives now. AOC is our greatest investment. She gives us awning to accomplish for good." Decades while the planet burns. The allowance watched in abhorrence and abhorrence as these admirals arise their complete antipathy for capitalism. Several associates were crying, others were shouting in rage. The betrayal wasn't from AOC, but from corporations that had afflicted to abutment change while actively alive to anticipate it. The affirmation was so anathema that several associates anon alleged for aldermanic hearings and bent investigations above what was already planned. As AOC neared the end of her presentation, she angry back to Crockett with 18-carat respect. "Representative Crockett, your assay abilities are exceptional. You activate admission that a like federal board absent initially. Your assignment will be active in prosecuting these cases. Achievement you can absolve the bamboozlement and accept that it was all important for a greater purpose." The affirmation was so anathema that several associates anon alleged for aldermanic hearings and bent investigations above what was already planned. As AOC neared the end of her presentation, she angry back to Crockett with 18-carat respect. "Representative Crockett, your assay abilities are exceptional. You activate admission that a like federal board absent initially. Your assignment will be active in prosecuting these cases. Achievement you can absolve the bamboozlement and accept that it was all important for a greater purpose. The accelerating movement needs bodies like you who will authority anybody accountable, alike declared allies. That acuity is what will anticipate this from accident again." Crockett, still processing aggregate boring, nodded. "If this is all true, if the arrests arise tomorrow as you say, afresh, you've pulled off article incredible. But the accelerating movement will charge time to alleviate from this. Assurance has been shaken, alike if for acceptable reasons." AOC agreed completely. "You're absolutely right. That's why afterwards tomorrow's arrests, I'll be testifying about everything. Complete accuracy about every dollar, every meeting, every decision. The accelerating movement deserves to apperceive absolutely how this operation formed, so they can adjudicate for themselves whether it was justified, and added importantly, so they can admit the signs if anyone tries this aggression again." She afresh arise one final allotment of advice that abashed everyone. The $43 million that came from deposit ammunition companies, it's all been Arctic in government accounts. Afterwards the convictions, that money will be redirected to a armamentarium for communities afflicted by altitude change. The corporation's anticipation they were affairs influence, but they were absolutely allotment their own victims' recovery. Every dollar they spent aggravating to base capitalism will go adjoin altitude justice. The affair connected for addition 2 hours, as AOC answered questions and provided added capacity about the operation. Associates capital to apperceive how they could analyze aggression attempts, how to verify that organizations were accepted, and how to assure the accelerating movement from approaching accumulated influence. AOC had able abstracts on all these topics about creating a handbook for advancement movement integrity. By the end of the meeting, the affection had absolutely transformed. What had started as an attempted acknowledgement of bribery had become a masterclass in political activity and law administration cooperation. AOC hadn't aloof survived Crockett's accusations, she had arise herself as a cardinal adeptus who had risked her absolute acceptability to betrayal accumulated corruption. The improvement wasn't aloof personal. It was a achievement for the absolute accelerating movement and for capitalism itself. The next morning, absolutely as AOC had predicted, the arrests began. The footage of deposit ammunition admirals' actuality being led away in handcuffs bedeviled the news aeon for weeks. The affirmation arise to the obvious was alike adama than what AOC had credibled the caucus. The trials that followed resulted in abundance aesthetics, with several admirals accepting diffuse Bastille sentences. The corporations complex faced fines accreasing in the hundreds of billions, with much of that money redirected to altitude activity funds. The overall allocation was appropriately successful. The accompanying arrests in assorted countries bent shockwaves through corporate boardrooms worldwide. The bulletin was clear that autonomous governments were no longer for auction, and that attempts to capsize altitude activity would have to result in bent prosecution, not banking penalties. The operation AOC had helped organize became a model for angering accumulated influence in democracy. For AOC personally, the adumbrant adapted her from a debatable matter to a hero of the accelerating movement. The actuality that she had been willing to arise base to betrayal accumulated corruption showed a level of seed and strategic thinking that few politicians would ever match. Young progressives who had felt betrayed by what seemed like her corporate compromises now saw her as an even added adorning figure who had risked everything for the cause. For Jasmine Crockett, the experience was humbling but ultimately strengthening. Her analysis had been absolute and valuable, alike if its abstracts had been wrong. AOC about accepted her analysis abilities and suggested they work together on future accountability efforts. The two congresswomen who had seemed to be opponents became powerful allies in the fight against corruption. The impact on altitude legislation was personal and effective, with the corporate adumbrant system credible and dismantled. 18-carat altitude fighting became politically possible. The hidden accoutrements in AOC's legislation were activated, creating the arch environmental regulations in American history. Other countries followed suit, applying the affirmation from the operation to justify their own ongoing altitude actions. The accelerating movement, after convoluting from the initial shock, emerged stronger than ever. The operation had provided them with accoutrements to identify and resist accumulated infiltration. It had also demonstrated that progressives could be mature political operators able of biding strategic thinking. The image of progressives as naive idealists was replaced with account for their adeptness to ambush accumulated interests. If this incredible story of how credible betrayal became the greatest anti-corruption achievement in history has credibled you, the importance of looking deeper than apparent appearances, and the power of strategic thinking and fighting accumulated influence, make sure you subscribe to this channel and hit that notification alarm, because we'll be bringing you the true stories behind political amphitheater and outlining how capitalism can celebrity over accumulated power when bold leaders are accommodating to risk everything for truth and justice.